So I've been thinking about doing this spiritual teaching many years ago, and finally I just decided just to do it, try it out, and because it occurred to me many years ago, seeing people on the path who are getting frustrated with not having an awakening, and if you're one of those persons out there who who haven't had an awakening yet, but who have watched all these videos, Eckhart Tolle and Muji and Adyashanti and Osho, blah, 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 the list goes on. And still you're just like frustrated that it hasn't happened. You haven't pierced the veil, right? You haven't experienced eternity. You haven't experienced presence. Quick caveat, I think most people have experienced presence and eternity before, many times in their lifetimes, but they just didn't understand what had happened, or the mind just quickly continued, it just went back to same old. So this spiritual teaching is that I came up with is, now this is daunting. I'm already getting the wind blowing and the signs hitting the fence. This spiritual teaching, there could be nuggets here for people out there. This could be a very powerful spiritual teaching that, who knows? I mean, that could possibly help some of you awaken out there, okay? And like I said before, especially if you have constantly watching other videos, spiritual teachers, and even, I in my videos too, I talk, we need to talk, but maybe this can help you see through something that you haven't seen before. Let's just do it. Now, I recommend that you stay with it, okay? You stay with the video as long as you can. There's going to be a lot of people out there who, after a minute or two, are going to turn it off or not see the value of it, and that's okay. But maybe there are a few out there who will understand what I'm trying to do with this teaching, okay? So, without further ado, here is I think I'm going to call this a secret spiritual teaching. I don't know how secret it is, but I've never seen it done before. But here is let's just say, a special spiritual teaching that could shake things up and possibly help you awaken. All right, here we go. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. 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 Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah. Blah, blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. blah, blah. Blah. Blah, blah. 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 Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. 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 Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. 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 Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah. All right, we're going to end this. It's a trip. The trip is only one way, too. I just noticed this. I've gone by this on a few videos before, and I just noticed trip. Yeah, what a trip. So, I hope you got something out of it. And maybe I'll do another video trying to explain some of this, but it doesn't really need to be explained. And I noticed actually while I was doing it that, you know, there was kind of a story going on. And so basically the mind is the veil, and we could listen to spiritual teachings for 2 years, 10 years, 20 years. We can listen to these spiritual teachers and all of their words. And I'm not saying that some of the words aren't meaningful and that some words can't be helpful. Of course they can. But for those out there who haven't awakened, the words, and they've been listening to these teachers for so long, the words end up becoming a handicap. They end up becoming another veil. They end up becoming things that the mind can chew on. Because eternity is silence. I mean, we hear stuff, we hear birds, cars going by. Okay, we're in the world of form and duality. Yes, we hear sound. We see things. But your truth is beyond all this. It's beyond all sound. It's beyond all words. It's beyond this duality. It's silent. It's stillness. It's presence. If all of this magically just vanished, their presence would still be here. Silence would still be here. Okay? The words that I'm saying, they're what's that word? Ephemeral. They have a beginning, and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Presence, eternity doesn't. It's always here. So the words, so we can constantly watch spiritual teachers and get hooked to their words and go, okay, these words are going to help me awaken. These words are going to help me to enter eternity, or to have eternity revealed to us. And in some cases, sure, that can happen. But many times it's the words in and of themselves that are blocking you. So I just wanted to, so I thought about this many years ago of just doing a blah, blah, blah video. And so that was my inaugural one. I might do a few more. I did notice that I could see that people watching this could actually come up with stories and fill in my blah, blah, blah with their own words and with their own interpretations, right? So so you might need to watch this again and again to see how your mind fills in the blanks, how your mind needs to constantly create language, right? And meaning. And so I could be going blah, 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 blah. And sure, I was just having fun and doing my thing, how I would regularly do it. And so I would point to things, and sure, so you could, so your mind tried to create meaning of what I was saying, right? It was trying to, and so catch yourself, because that's another trap. Okay, that's another trap. You know, it's a fun trap. It could be fun. Oh yeah, this is what he was trying to say, or this is maybe he was saying this, even though he was saying blah, 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 he was saying this. Okay, fine. That's fun. But go beyond the words, go beyond the blah. There's something beyond the blah. Blah, blah, blah. It's right here, right now. It's right here, right now. They say silent, what is it? The Tao, the first Tao chapter says the Tao that can be named is not the Tao, the true Tao. So it's like the naming creates a veil. Naming creates a distance from your truth. So maybe during, I'm sure people started seeing me go blah, 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 and they're like, turn it off, because you need, because the mind then says, no, I need a teacher or a spiritual teaching that can make my mind, give it, I don't know, pleasure, or give me something entertaining, right? Entertaining. So, all right. So hopefully that helps some of you out there. And if not, then hopefully some of you got a kick out of it, because it's actually pretty funny. And if you think about it, it's actually it's a commentary on content in itself out there, YouTube. And I watch YouTube and I see videos, and some of them have been very helpful for me. So I'm not dismissing that, but I'm just saying in general, there's a lot of blah, blah, blah out there. All right. So until we meet again in the blah, 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 blah.